Sustaining Creativity podcast. I'm your host, Mari Riesberg. Over the past several years, I've combined my degrees in acting and somatic psychology to share my sustaining creativity techniques with performers. And now I've decided to share it with a bigger audience that includes you. I believe we are all creative, and this podcast is all about that. I'll be interviewing people from all backgrounds, ages, and creativity experiences to share just how creative we all are. Today, I'll be chatting with Michael Lee, a transformational coach, trainer, teacher, speaker, writer, and expert in the mindset of creativity and innovation. Please enjoy Michael Lee. Welcome to the Sustaining Creativity podcast. Today, I am here with Michael Lee, innovativity instigator and transformational coach, trainer, teacher, speaker, writer, and expert in the mindset of creativity and innovation. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Mari. It's wonderful to be on the podcast.
I'm super excited to have you today to chat about creativity and all of the innovation and innovativity aspects that you work with in this awesome world of creativity. So before we dive into questions, if you could take a couple of minutes and just let our listeners know a little bit more about who you are and what you do.
Sure. I don't know what else to say. You've said everything, but just to flush it out a bit, I guess, I've been a creative professional my whole adult life, in the primarily film and TV industry. I spent many years as a reality and factual, documentaries, reality TV, and so on, director, producer, and writer. And about 10 years ago, I started getting interested in creativity as a field of thought, and started teaching it actually in a film school that I helped start. And over the course of the last, most of the last 10 years, developed a system based on, research and reading and thinking and training the students in that system. And then I've come up with a system which has proven to work very effectively to get people to up their creativity levels quite quickly and then sustain that. So I'm still working in the film industry, although only in drama now, not doing any factual at all. And that's a whole different story. But the real focus of my life these days is really much more on training, coaching, and essentially helping people access their creative minds. I am certified as a master of creativity and innovation coaching, which whatever that actually means, right? Just means I've done a lot of work there. I'm a master NLP practitioner, again, just means I've done a lot of work there. But what really excites me is I'm very committed to helping people free themselves from the addiction to themselves that keeps us, creatively stuck. I'm sure that you probably know the famous study that was done by George Land.
I am familiar, but if you wouldn't mind sharing it for our listeners.
Sure. So George Land was a NASA psychologist who was very interested in creativity and basically helping the scientists and engineers at NASA become more creative. And he did a study where he worked with 5-year-old children and found that 98% of them scored at the level of genius and creativity. He decided to find out basically when that stopped happening, because he didn't find that was the case in the adult world. And so he went back and tested the same children at age 10. And I'll just let the viewers take a moment to guess, listeners, take a moment to guess what the statistic was from 98%. The same children at the age of 10 dropped down to 30%. And at the same children, again, at the age of 15, dropped down. I'll get, just a moment to think. Yes, the answer is 12%. And then finally, he tested 280,000 adults, including people at NASA and elsewhere, and found that the average in the adult population was 2% creative genius scores. So essentially, the short of it is that 98% of 5-year-olds are creative geniuses and 2% of adults. So clearly something's going on.
Yeah. I mean, that study just shocked me. And
It
when I think
is.
more about it, it makes a lot of sense in kind of the trajectory between 5, 10, 15, and adulthood. What happens, how life, our lives progress, and that other things become more important than creativity or have more value in society than creativity does.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I found it really shocking when I first came across that study, that the drop between 5 and 10, because sure, it's pretty startling to go down to 2%, but when you drop from 98% to 30% between the ages of 5 and 10, right? That's a big drop. I mean, that's 2/3 of the people, and they're still 10 years old, so it's not like they're not like they're obsessed with all the survival skills of the adult. But this is why I think it's very important to note that, yes, while we say something like you just said, right, like the stuff about society, and I mean, there's a famous TED talk by Dr. Ken Robinson about how schools kill creativity, and everybody knows most schools aren't good for creativity, and most people also know, like you've said, that society kind of dictates that. It's a kind of first industrial revolution mindset,
right?
that built the schools, and it's still kind of that way in society a lot of the time. We don't reward creative thinking in most of the kind of work environments that exist. We reward people to do the things that worked before, right? Most leaders are designed to be people who know the answers, not people who need to find it out or are willing to let other people come up with the answers. So that's the old system. But what's far more important, I think, far more difficult to deal with, and this is, I suppose, where I come from, which is maybe different than some people, is that the most rigorous block we have against our creativity, which I think is quite a natural problem, is ourself.
Right.
So it's school and society, but also self, because we are designed as human beings to become somebody. And it is completely beyond our thinking. Think that we should not become somebody. Right? Like everything we talk about, people are like, they have to assert your identity. You have to become, you have to know who you are. You have to find that thing about you that's special and unique. All of that is actually very damaging to creative thinking, because it creates a sort of obsession or even addiction to the self, right? And like one of the biggest problems that we have as humans is dealing with other people, because they get offended if you say something they don't like, or if you criticize them or tell them what they're doing isn't okay, they get defensive, right?
Yeah.
And all of that is because people are trained that the way to live is to build a unique, identity, ego, whatever it is, and then like defend that. And the only thing that we eventually do is, okay, we'll study, get a master's degree or PhD, we'll learn a little bit more stuff, right? But we won't actually fundamentally be willing to be flexible and transformational about ourselves at any moment. And the thing is this: creativity, as I define it, is the ability to be different from yourself or think differently from yourself, right?
Yeah.
And the great creative minds in history were always people who shifted their thinking regularly. Right? They didn't stick with the same. Maybe Picasso, for example, didn't make the same paintings for 50 years. He had periods, right? And changed radically. Yeah. So, he may have seemed like the similar guy when he went to the pub or whatever, but when he was painting, he assumed a very different mindset, at one point from another. And where I come from is that in order to be more creative, you're only going to have the thoughts that you would have, right? Like Mari, if you're a very defined person, will have the type of thoughts that you have. And in order to become more creative and flexible, you need to be more flexible with your own identity. So what I try to help people do is like, okay, if you have a project you need done, what self would fit that project?
Right. Yeah.
And then you'll get ideas that would fit that project. So otherwise all you're doing is really just expanding a little bit here or there.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it sounds like there's just so much flexibility that you're being asked or is invited into creativity and creative identity, how you can shift your identity or choose to be someone else in that world of who am I, or how do I define who I am, and how can it morph and shift and change. And I don't have to be beholden to that identity that I've had in my mind for the past 15, 20 years.
Exactly. And that's why I think you see that big drop between 5 and 10.
Yeah.
A 5-year-old doesn't really have any identity, right? They don't really have a clue who they are, and they don't really care either. If you tell a 5-year-old to be a pirate, then that's fine,
Right.
But if you look at a 10-year-old, they've already started to be self-conscious and start to worry about who they are, how they fit in with other kids, what their parents say about them, or they've already started to develop it. And I think it's about 8 years old that people generally are said to start to develop a self, right, an identity. Before that, it's a whole bunch of things that are happening, but there's no clear kind of this is me. And so I think that drop between 5 and 10 is a lot more due to a very natural process that human beings have undergone for a very long time.
Yeah.
Much more than the schooling system or anything like that. So, the fundamental shift that has to happen is that in order for us to become more creative, is that people have to start to really understand that, like, they got to stop being so excited about, like, I'm this thing, and actually build a flexibility to be able to shift. It also be a lot less wars,
Oh, it's so fascinating. Creativity, I think, has the potential, or I hope to support more people in finding their creative flexibility. And that's part of what the podcast is about, for people to hear different perspectives and ideas and ways to think about life and creativity. So I appreciate your perspective and all of the pieces that go into it, and super fascinating. And I'm sure we could talk forever about identity and all of the pieces that go into it. But I'm going to hop into some questions and ask you, Michael, what does it mean to you to be creative?
Well, as I said, right, to me, what creativity is the ability to think differently from yourself. I think that's to me what creativity is. It's that flexibility and the ability to generate ideas that would be different than you thought. So obviously, creativity implies having a lot of ideas, or having ideas that are different than you would expect.
Yeah.
And obviously, creativity is a thinking process, as opposed to, say, innovation, which is an action process. Otherwise very much the same. So one of the things I think it's important when we talk about creativity is to erase that notion that creativity and innovation are two different things, right?
Yeah.
They really are. They're really two parts of one process, and that's a process of confronting a problem and then solving it, right? And if you walk into a lion in the bush, there's really only one way to solve that.
Yeah.
It's been done for centuries or millennia, and it is the right way, and it's not run, right?
Yes.
Yeah, unless you have a friend with you who's slower than maybe. But
right. Similar here in Colorado, it's a bear. Where our situation is a bear, it's not a lion.
Right. Yeah. Right. So there's but life isn't really like that. We have problems that could come up with more exciting and interesting solutions most of the time. So yeah, to me, creativity is that it's a problem solving process, right? And you may not approach it that way. If you're working on I don't know, like writing a piece of music or something, you might not perceive of the problem, but the problem is still there, whatever the problem is. And I think people generally find that when the problem is clear, the solution becomes easier. So it's harder to just go write a piece of music, say, just because you feel like it. But if you can define some kind of structure around that, whether it's you want to solve a challenge of how would you write music without using a D in the piece or whatever it is, a famous French novel that was written without using an E. I can't remember the name of it right now, but the entire novel has no E in it.
Oh my gosh.
And so, those kind of problems do make creativity somehow easier
Mm-hmm.
because it gives you a challenge to respond to.
Yeah. I mean, I think many people can feel overwhelmed in creativity, but when you give it boundaries or some structure or a problem, as you said, it in some way becomes easier to navigate and function within. And
just, by the way, just because we're on, in the internet world, yeah. the name of the book is Gadsby. It's not French, actually. I made a mistake. It's actually an English novel by Ernest Vincent Wright, and it does not include a single letter E. And apparently a work that deliberately avoids certain letters is known as a lipogram. So there we go.
I love it. I had no idea. And I can't even wrap my head around in this moment how I would write a novel without using the letter E.
It's pretty hard to think of how you can write a sentence without using the letter E.
And yet, here's someone who took that on and wrote a whole novel. I'm curious if it's any good.
It's nearly 100 years old and still something that people talk about on podcasts.
Oh my gosh. Well, fascinating. But you were also talking about problems or challenges. And I'm curious, in your own life, how do you face creative challenges?
Okay, so I think I've sort of had two phases in my life. Mm-hmm. One ended about 4 or 5 years ago. And I'm going to ask you to edit this because I've found out there is a second book, and it is French, by Georges Perec.
Oh.
And it's called La Disparition.
Okay.
And it was also done without the letter E, inspired by that other book. And then it was translated by a guy named Gilbert Adair, who renamed it A Void, and also translated it without the letter E.
Oh my gosh. Who knew that this was even a genre of writing or a test of writing? So you've talked about problems and challenges, and in your own life, how do you face creative challenges?
Yeah, so I was saying I would say there's two phases to my life. The part until fairly recently, mm-hmm. when I faced creative challenges with a huge amount of excitement and chaos. Mm-hmm. And then I would say I'm a recovering addict. I was very heavily using marijuana for a number of years, and that very much aligned with a change when I stopped, a change in my entire approach to life. I was a very anxious person. I had a lot of feeling that whatever I was doing creatively wasn't good enough ever. And usually how I approached creativity then was to try to make it the best thing that had ever been done in that realm. Mm-hmm. So I wrote a novel when I was about 25, which was actually going pretty well until I decided it had to be the best book ever written in English. It kind of went haywire. And the same thing happened many times with projects I've done. So these days I don't really approach it that way. For me, when I sit down to do creative work, it's really simple. I have a little bit of a routine that I do to get myself into the mindset, which is based on the structure that I teach. And then I just do it, and I think I've learned a lot of lessons around, Thomas Edison's very famous story about the 10,000 experiments to make the light bulb, right? Mm-hmm. He never saw, he said he never saw that as failures, but rather 10,000 successful experiments in how not to make the light bulb. A lot of writers sit down and write every day and it comes out, terrible, mm-hmm. but they just keep doing it. Someone like Hemingway said that, the first draft of everything is and
You can
and
swear, it's fine.
and so he pretty much accepted that whatever he was typing out was going to be bad, and he would have to rewrite it. It's just I think of, I mean, I primarily write and do video. That's pretty much my creative output mostly, right? And a lot of speaking now as well, but a lot of that is based on writing stuff first, right? And to me, I see those as very sculptural forms. I see them as things where if I'm writing, it's like get words out so you can sculpt the words, right? You can't make a sculpture with the mud or the clay or the whatever there. So for me, writing, I've come to see it as a very sculptural process, rather than a constructive process or something. It's not something where I'm thinking, okay, I have to put these things together and then it's done. It's more like throw all the stuff there and then figure out how to take David out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a great perspective, or like I think many people will hear that and think, oh, that's a really new way of looking at creativity or a creative challenge, of thinking it in that idea of sculpture. Like you need the words to be there to turn into something. It's not just magically going to happen. So there's some output of creating something to then work with afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think a lot of sculptors, they've spent a lot of time selecting the right stone or selecting the right. It's not just, they don't just sit there and sculpt. There's a lot of other stuff happening, right? And one of the things I have found really interesting as again, primarily a writer, historically, I lived in Prague in the 1990s, and it was like this place where tons of people from all over the world came to be artists, like in Paris, and I got to know a lot of people doing different kinds of things, and it was, I guess, surprising to me to discover things like that. Painters spend a lot of time, finding the right paint or building their own canvases, stuff that has nothing to do with the creative process of painting. And yet they spend a lot of time on that, and I think it is part of the process. It is part of, for them, having the canvas be the right type of canvas or the right size.
Yeah.
A lot of work that I had a friend who was a painter. A lot of what he did was figuring out what size paintings he should make. And the only way you could figure that out was by painting stuff and then going, I don't like these small paintings,
All right.
So there's a huge part of creativity which is very functional. It's not just like having great ideas and executing them. There's also this kind of, washing the dishes kind of part.
Yeah, I talk a lot on the podcast about kind of everyday creativity, the things that we do without thinking really, or it's part of our routine, and yet there is creative aspect to, or creative moments within it. So I understand that finding the right size canvas to paint on and that process that artists go through in figuring that out. So I think it is a part of the process, whether it's seen as being creative in the bigger world or not. It is what gets us to that creative output. Nice. Well, when you think about inspiration, and it sounds like many things inspire you, and having lived all over the world and worked in many different creative fields, I imagine many things do inspire you. But when you think about inspiration today in your life, who or what inspires you?
Yeah, you've asked me a very interesting question, because I do a talk on the source of creative inspiration. This year I started doing, and so if you don't mind, I'm going to take your question a little bit to the left.
Sure, go ahead.
Inspiration, the word means breathing in. Now, most people experience the idea that inspiration is something that, is difficult to get somehow. And there was a long historical debate. Well, actually, for most of history, the idea was that inspiration came from God.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, in ancient Greece, artists were not considered to be people who had their own ideas, right? Art was not something that was creative at all. The word create or creative wasn't used at all.
Mm-hmm.
They were imitators. They were trying to, the goal of art in ancient Greece was to try to copy nature in the best possible way.
Yeah.
And for most of history, that's what it was, until the Enlightenment into the Renaissance, when slowly people started to use the word create for artists.
Mm-hmm.
And, in the Renaissance, it started to become a thing that artists started to say, I am creating something. It's not God, but it's me. And it's sort of like you see it after the invention, I guess, of perspective as an art form.
Okay. Uh-huh.
Right. That was like kind of the culmination of copying, right? Nature, because they finally figured out how to make things look like nature. But primarily since the Renaissance, the idea was that inspiration actually came from within us, right? Mm-hmm. And that became a more and more common feeling until we reached the point that creativity itself started to become a discipline in the 1900s, such that things like Einstein or Niels Bohr could be saying that they used creativity in science, right? Einstein invented the theory of relativity. It's not an effort to use nature's models. It's actually made up, right? Mm-hmm. And I think it was 1930 that creativity was first presented as its own thing at a psychological conference, where creativity as its own thing that wasn't attached to anything specific.
Right.
Before that, there was no idea that creativity existed at all outside of art. So it went from didn't exist to only existed in art, then it existed in science and so forth, and then finally it became its own thing. And for the last 90 years or so, we've I think it was J.P. Guilford was the guy's name that did this, and then about 90 years ago. And for the last 90 years now, we've started studying creativity as a discipline on its own, right? It's a human capacity rather than a thing. So long way around to get to the point that there are many, many, many quotes throughout history about how God has inspired us. Even Johnny Cash has a great one. So even recently, people have had that. But Jack London said something in the early part of the 1900s that I remember reading a long time ago. And he said that you can't wait for inspiration to happen. You have to go out after it with a club. Mm-hmm. And that quote, has always stuck with me. Yeah. That kind of is the real, the really clear expression of, internal inspiration, right? Mm-hmm. That it won't happen by itself.
Yeah.
William Faulkner also said that, and there's a dispute that he might not have said it, but anyway, it's said that he said that he only writes when he's inspired. Fortunately, he gets inspired every morning at 9. Right. So now this is really a fast forward version of the talk that I do. Yeah. Inspiration means breathing. Uh-huh. Right. That's what it means. And in a way, bringing the spirit in, right? Yeah. And yet, nobody worries about how do you breathe? Like nobody would get on a talk like this and say, can you tell me about how you breathe? Unless I was a breathing expert who, had some special way of breathing, right? Uh-huh. That would. But my point is that inspiration is as simple as breathing, right? We breathe in, we breathe out. Mm-hmm. When we breathe, we're getting inspired. When we breathe out, we're being creative. Mm. And in fact, most of what we're breathing out is shit, right? And we don't worry about that either. We don't say, okay, I'm breathing out shit. Oh my God. No, we want it to be, we expect it to be shit. It's good. We're cleaning ourselves out. And in order to get inspired, we have to breathe out first. Yeah. We can't breathe in twice, right? We have to breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. So in order to be inspired, we have to be creative first. Okay. And in order to be creative, we have to be inspired first. But we are responsible for that. And now here's the trick. If I ask you, Mari, what inspires you?
Mm-hmm.
Just give me something.
What inspires me? I mean,
Yeah.
literally anything and everything is inspiring to me. I mean, yesterday I was inspired by a childhood memory of making flower crowns.
Okay. So you're really ruining my point here, but
Sorry.
you'll grant that most people are more inspired by specific things, right?
Right. They might be inspired by a piece of art or inspired by a piece of music or, I don't know, their animal, their pet or their spouse
Right.
or, yeah.
Or walking on the beach.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And some people are inspired in the morning, right?
Yes.
And other people more at night.
Correct.
And what inspires one person is fairly unique to that person, and another person has other things that inspire them. And in fact, some people wouldn't be inspired by your cat, but they might even be inspired by the beach.
Yes.
So it seems fairly clear that whatever inspires people comes from outside them, right?
Mm. Yeah.
So no, right? Because it's the response to that thing, right?
Right, exactly.
So although it seems like everything that inspires us does come from outside, the reality is that what inspires us actually comes from inside us. So I'm inspired by a beach for whatever reason, you're not, or I'm inspired at night and for some reason you're inspired in the morning, or you're inspired by beautiful snow and I'm not. The point is, it's all coming from me.
Mm-hmm.
So like you, Mari, I've taken a conscious choice to get inspired by whatever's around me at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it doesn't, I can no longer say, to answer your question that you wanted me to answer probably 30 seconds. I can't say to you, well, I get inspired by going to the beach.
Yeah.
I mean, I love going to the beach. It's fantastic. Right. But I don't need to go to the beach in order to write what I'm writing or whatever.
Sure.
And I could be inspired by a dead rat.
Yeah.
To think of something really interesting. And I could go to the beach and really enjoy it, but not be inspired, quote unquote, in any way. So for me, inspiration is entirely a choice.
Mm.
It is not, it is to take that Jack London quote a step further, right? You don't have to go out after it with a club. You just have to use a club like right where you're sitting,
Okay.
And it might be that, like, if you're writing a novel about wolves, you might have to go out and look at wolves because
right.
it's not much about inspiration as information, right? Or getting ideas that would trigger thoughts, but it's not like that sense that inspiration is difficult or hard. It's only that way because people are already finding it hard to have ideas, and then they blame it on they're not inspired, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, you cannot hold your breath for more than a couple minutes.
Right. It's true.
Right? If you do, your body will literally knock you unconscious to force you to breathe.
Yeah.
That's creativity. People need to get that clear. Creativity is that easy. It actually is.
Yeah. I love this perspective. Very different than other people that I've had on the podcast around inspiration. And I think it's really important to have different perspectives and different ideas to challenge what we believe and what we think is the way to do something. And to now have this version of inspiration is breathing in and breathing out creativity. And it happens all the time. And we have a choice in it. So thank you for sharing all of that.
Well, I mean, and look, just to make, I mean, it might sound a bit rough or tough, but I mean, look out the window at the nature. Like you said, it was snowing today where you are. And if you look out the window, nature just creates stuff.
Yes. Yeah, very true.
It doesn't struggle over it. And I think that's the thing that we as humans, and that's that whole way we started this conversation of the creative genius disappearance of it. We are the ones in the way of it.
Right.
If we just let it be, it will come. And, obviously there's a lot of techniques that you can use to fuel things like reading about what you want to write about, or what, if you're making music about something, to get quote unquote inspired by experiencing that thing. But I don't see that as inspiration. I just see that as research, you know?
Oh, yeah.
It's like if you want to write music about a mountain that you want to go look at the mountain, so you experience the music of that mountain, that is not inspiration, right? That's just research. It's just going and seeing what the mountain's saying to you, right? Because inside of all that stuff I just said, you know, I've kind of elided over the really interesting argument, which is, do I create or does God create, right? And whatever your God is, and I'm not imposing a specific religion, but that is one of the most interesting arguments and discussions I've ever heard around creativity. You know, where does it come from? And it seems fairly common that people who are creative and, you know, at a high level, consistently, if you read books from like Csikszentmihalyi and the people that have written about it, most creative people are pretty humble about their role in the process, you know, and that we as creative people are channeling something. Yeah. You know, and our job is to do that effectively, and that's like almost our responsibility. Is to make that connection. Yeah. And that's why I suppose there's some really interesting stories about ideas that jumped from one person to another. You know, and there's no logical explanation for how that happened. Right. That people around the world were experiencing the same idea at around the same time, or one person had it and another person did something with it. Yeah, there's a couple of great examples of that. I mean, there's a book by Thomas Kuhn called The Nature of Scientific Revolutions. It's a very weird book because it's very, very academic, but it's considered by a lot of people to be a very important book of intellectual thought. It basically points out how almost every scientific revolution that occurred over the past few hundred years was not the result of some kind of obvious slow process, but was consistently a leap forward after a period of kind of overall stagnation. And that leap forward always happened in multiple locations at the same time for people that didn't talk to each other or know each other. And I mean, it's kind of pointless now because it doesn't exist anymore, you know? Right. But a couple hundred years back, you know, there were 2 or 3 people involved with these revolutions at the same time, chasing each other in a way, without even knowing they were doing that, you know? And it's like somehow the idea itself had found its time or its moment and was trying to get out, you know? Yeah. I do think that is a fascinating story. The stories about that happening, I think are really interesting. Yeah, just hearing about it as well. But when I briefly kind of touched upon this earlier, but we're talking kind of about everyday creativity and how you brought up washing the dishes and creativity, but what are everyday issues in your own life that you use creativity to solve? No, I mean, I think you've already said it in a way, right? Like everything in our life involves creativity if it's needed. I mean, any time that we don't use creativity is pretty much when we're just applying the same solution. So you don't use creativity to brush your teeth generally, you know, because you've done it 8,000 times or actually more than that. And you know, you don't use creativity to take a shower. But if I have to draw, I mean, look, it's COVID and all that. So, you know, I don't generally have the same life I've had, but if I have to drive somewhere and I've never been there before, you know, suddenly there's a creative element to it, right? Because there's an element of like, how do I get there in the best way? And usually, I don't know, if there's traffic, you might try a new route that your GPS doesn't tell you, you know, but you know, I guess I have a puppy, right? So I need to be creative sometimes in how I'm dealing with the puppy because it changes, you know, it evolves itself and has, you know, now it jumps on my bed and gets on the foot of my bed whenever I get in bed. So like now I have to come up with like ways to express love to the puppy while still maybe drawing some boundaries, because as the puppy gets bigger, that wouldn't be so good. So I think everything we do that isn't repetitive, it's one of those things, we have that part of our brain that helps us do things without being creative.
Right.
Like driving to the same job every day. Right.
Yeah.
And the more we get out of that and actually be able to access the creative part of our thinking as much as possible, again, that helps us increase, the level of creative thinking we're bringing to everything.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of people probably find that to be really exhausting. That's why we don't. I mean, look, that's why we don't wash the dishes in a creative way each time.
Right.
But one of the things, it's not quite the answer to your question. One of the things I get people to do when I'm training them is, intentionally do things that are very, very much habit driven in a different way, like drive a different way to the same place, or listen to a radio station that you definitely don't want to, or music that you don't like. Try to bring more creativity to something like washing the dishes. How could you do it differently?
Yeah.
That kind of stuff will wake up a lot of the stuff that's gone to sleep. And it is great to use really simple stuff for that, to read daily tasks,
Yeah.
Because we the more we live from habit, the less opportunity we have to be creative. And this really applies to people, especially who don't work in a creative way, like as part of their job, right? Because for me, like I do very different things all the time, and you do. But even as a coach, it's like every client is different. You can't just go apply a formula to people. But a lot of people, most of what they do every day is not that creative at work, right? And there might be some demand for creativity, but it's hard for them to access it. So that's a really easy way to do it, is to just start doing kind of some of the simple things differently,
Yeah, that's a great idea and reminder, and a way to encourage people to find creativity in their lives in the potentially mundane tasks that we do, like brushing your teeth, folding laundry, washing the dishes. How could you incorporate that or see it through that creative lens and think in a new way about something that we do habitually in our life?
Yeah, and I mean, the other way to add to that, Maury, is just to actually make creativity part of your daily activities, just like you would going for a jog,
Yeah.
Or I don't know, like whatever it is that people do kind of on a daily basis. Some people like to write in a journal, or some people, they call their mother every night, but whatever it is that people do, to actually take 10 or 15 minutes every day and do something creative, right? That could be something like arty, or it could be something not arty at all. It could be doing puzzles. I personally, one thing I do a lot is I do a lot of crossword puzzles.
Oh, okay. Nice.
I just have I've transferred my addiction to marijuana for an addiction to crossword puzzles.
Okay.
So I they're far less damaging, very dangerous at times, but luckily the New York Times has 365 times 20 crossword puzzles on record. In fact, I think times 30 actually.
Oh my gosh!
Literally like 10,000 crossword puzzles in the New York Times. So, I've got some time I can burn on this. But excellent. Puzzles are good. Like just for fun, just like one time a day, do a puzzle.
Yeah. No, I love it. I like the 1 minute mysteries where you have to figure out, how did this happen? Get you thinking in a unique fashion or a different way from what you might always think about. But yeah, I love it. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. It has been such a treat to chat all about creativity and innovation. And if you wouldn't mind letting our listeners know a little bit about if you have anything coming up or how to get in touch with you.
Sure, Maury. The simplest way, I've got stuff coming up all the time, but nothing specifically bigger or better than another. So the best, and I've got a book coming out a bit later in the year. best is just to either go to my website, which is www.innovativityinstitute.com. And other way would just be go to LinkedIn. It's at Michael Lee Creativity is how you would find me on LinkedIn. Just a brief little ding on the Innovativity Institute, could I?
Yeah, please.
What we do there is we have a training program called the Innovation Explosion, which I believe you have started studying in a little bit.
I am. I'm halfway through.
Wow, very good. How's it going?
It's great. I love it. It's definitely given me new ways to look at things in my life, to take a creative project that I'm working on or have had challenge or feel stuck around and crack it open in a new way and move through those challenges and come out the other side with more confidence and more ability to believe in what I have to offer is worth it or worthy, so to speak. Yeah.
That's very good news to hear. And you also are involved with our other training product was a creativity and innovation coaching training with international certification process through the ICR in the Netherlands, and soon we will be adding the ICF, which is the bigger coaching international body. So those are the two big products. There's some other stuff on there on the website you can check out if you're interested. Various kinds of coaching and stuff. The really important part, though, is to remember the word innovativity. Innovativity is innovation, creativity, put into one word because they are one thing, as I said right at the beginning of this conversation.
Yeah.
And really all it's about is the mindset of letting yourself realize that it is the most natural thing in the world. To innovate is just like breathing. So that's really the message I would like to leave people with if they've made it all the way to the end of listening to us. Is really, guys, just get that ultimately, whatever the mechanism that can help you release it, creativity and innovation are your birthright. And it is unfair to yourself to think of it any other way. So it's innovativityinstitute.com, or hit me on LinkedIn. Happy to chat to anyone, and really, really proud and honored to have been asked to be here with you.
Thank you so much. It's been such a treat. Thanks for listening to the Sustaining Creativity Podcast. We'd love to keep in touch, so follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We are at Sustaining Creativity. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Tag your friends and family so they can listen too. We love to hear from you, so leave your reviews, comments, and questions. Check out our website, sustainingcreativity.com, for upcoming offerings and creativity coaching. Tune in Tuesdays for our next episode. And remember, with creativity, anything's possible.